So, I just saw the new Dune just like 3 hours ago, so, I gotta get my thoughts out on it, because whenever I see a movie, and especially since it's post-COVID and I've just been going out to see all the movies, I saw Candyman, I saw The Last Duel, and I've been waiting for this Dune movie, because, I like Dune, so let's get right into it. What do I think of the new Dune?
The planet is Arrakis, also known as Dune.
Oh yeah, I'm wearing a cap this time. Pretty snazzy, huh? Yeah, just kidding. This thing barely fits me. My hair is like cotton candy, it's just pushing it out. Anywho, what do I think of the new Dune? Well, I'm a big fan of the original Dune. If you know anything about me, it's that I'm a hardcore Dune simp. A couple memes have been made on my Discord server where fellows will post me photoshopped onto the Baron, and it says, "He who controls the spice controls the universe." Because you know what I say about my comics is that they're pretty gosh darn spicy. And of course this fits in with the good old melange, that good old worm droppings. So I've been a big fan of the Dune franchise ever since I saw the original Dune on VHS. I'm talking the 1980s David Lynch variety. And for whatever reason, people just seem to rag on this movie to no end, which is like ridiculous, because everyone's like, "I wanted Jodorowsky's Dune. Hey, I wanted Jodorowsky to do," like, shut up. Like, yeah, you can wish for a hypothetical movie that could have existed all you want, but like, I've never even heard of this Jodorowsky guy. He hasn't even made any movies worth watching, probably. He's probably just some pretentious stuffhead. Meanwhile, David Lynch is like one of the best directors. A while back, someone was like, "Don't you think David Lynch is pretentious?" Because usually with people who are actually pretentious, I say they're pretentious, but David Lynch is a director who's earned his salt at this point. Like, maybe, if I was alive back in the 80s when he came out onto the scene, I'd say, yeah, this guy's pretentious as hell, but like, he's been pumping out the hits for like 50 years straight. Give the guy a break. And his original Dune is so fucking good. It's got Patrick Stewart. It's got, the Baron is excellent. I love that nipple milking scene. It's just so sadistic and shows what a cruel bastard Baron Harkonnen is, which is necessary for the integrity of the story. And also, of course, it's sufficiently David Lynch-esque, which is something he can really use to his advantage. So, ever since this new Dune movie's been announced, I've been like, I want to see this thing. I want to see it, because I'm a huge Dune stan. I consider it one of the all-time classics of science fiction. And I was just like, yeah, let's go see this thing. I want to see Dune. I've been looking forward to it for like 9 months now, and tonight I finally saw it. And my feelings are kind of mixed, because I would give the original Dune like a 10. It's a perfect sci-fi movie. It is a perfect sci-fi film. I give this new one like an 8. I'd give it an 8. It's not a perfect sci-fi movie. It's a very good sci-fi movie, but it's not a perfect sci-fi. Dune, of course, is a very old sci-fi story, but the appeal of it is that it still holds up. Frank Herbert is an excellent writer and is very good at looking into the far future. Obviously, Dune has a very different appeal from something like Star Trek, which is set in the reasonably near future, a couple centuries from now. Dune is set in like the year 10,000, where everything is just batshit crazy. Humanity is disseminated amongst the stars, and everything's just this weird mix of like European and Arabic influence, and nobody even knows about Earth anymore, which is the kind of thing that Will Smith, Jaden Smith type movie tried doing After Earth. Total piece of shit. And they bragged about how Will Smith has the futuristic accent. "Oh, I'm a ranger, sir." But, it's not necessary, because there's nothing inherently about the far future that means people wouldn't talk with a normal voice. So, in the new Dune, they all talk with, for the most part, pretty normal accents. This is to the movie's benefit, obviously. I think one of this version's best points is obviously Jason Momoa as Duncan Idaho. Duncan Idaho in the book is one of the characters you're really supposed to, identify with, because he's the only character named after a U.S. state and is therefore an identifiable character. Even though probably by this point nobody knows what Idaho is anymore, it's at least nice to know that this character is named Idaho or something. It makes the world feel more, kind of easy to connect with, if that makes sense. Obviously, Aquaman is a bloated, overhyped piece of shit. And, it does for Jason Momoa what Skyscraper did for Dwayne Johnson and the Suicide Squad does for John Cena. But, these beefcake type actors can actually be good if they're given a lot of material to work with. And I think Jason Momoa is perfect as Duncan Idaho. It's also, of course, very interesting to see him without his trademark beard for once. That's pretty interesting. So, Jason Momoa, good job. Best and most recognizable actor in the movie, and he really brings his all. So, good job with Jason Momoa. The other really strong point of this movie is the new Baron. I think it's really important to get the Baron down. I think it's important to make the Baron as schluppy and blobulous as possible. He's basically a human glob, and it's very important to get this nailed. Now, I do like original Baron, and like I said, this version doesn't have the nipple milking scene, which really kind of, lowers the sadism that the Baron is reputable for. I heard before I saw the movie that they were going to try to make the Baron, more sympathetic or some shit, and they didn't. He's still a vile little slug of a guy, but, the prosthetics they put on his neck are excellent. All the flab they give him, and this version of the Baron can also levitate, which of course is in original Dune, and just good stuff all around. The Baron is so good. I totally buy into the Baron. The Baron's just flipping excellent. I totally like the Baron, and I like how first we see the Baron's nephew and we're like, oh, that's the Baron, and then he's just the nephew of the Baron, and the Baron's even more grotesque. So, props to this Dune for that. They also make all the Harkonnens look like these fat brutes, which makes sense because ultimately Dune is a series about, humans evolving into practically different species. So every planet has their own kind of variety of human. Each house is its own kind of sect, its own kind of look and feel. And this movie gets that down nice. I also think this movie does a good job of setting up the Atreides planet. You get scenes in the Atreides graveyard, which look fine. The Atreides graveyard looks pretty good. I think it's better at original Dune at establishing the contrast between the planet Paul is from and the planet he's going to. So props to this movie for that. It does that really good. The problem I draw with the new Dune, and I knew this ever since I saw the trailer, is it's CGI. And, I've said this in the past, I do give some movies, the CGI pass. Like Little Nicky. That movie uses CGI, but it's freaking hilarious and it has Adam Sandler. But even if I give a movie the CGI pass, and I very much give this new Dune the CGI pass, because I think Frank Herbert's story is so strong that it's impossible practically to make a bad Dune, because the story is just timeless. I give this movie the CGI pass. That does not mean that I can't shit on the CGI. It just doesn't look that good. Now, there's some points, truth be told, where the CGI looks convincing. With the more abstract ships, like the big spherical one in the beginning that has the Emperor's Party on it, the one that obviously goes to Arrakis with the Emperor's the Duke of Atreides party on it, because they're big and blocky, and I think a computer can render geometry decently. The Dragonfly helicopters look, they look okay, They're probably the best looking ships. There's 2 points in the movie where I just completely don't buy it. One is where there's a spice harvester, and it has these little grappling hooks, and one of the grappling hooks fails, and like, oh my god, this malfunctioning grappling hook looks so fake. It looks so CGI. The other bit was with the mouse, which I guess is supposed to be like this dramatic story beat, but the problem is that they CGI this mouse. They could have just got a real mouse, because I feel like Dune is such a grounded series that it doesn't need to make an alien mouse that looks like a Dr. Seuss creature. Like, just have it be a normal mouse, you know? It's a desert planet. Just have it be a real mouse and just film a real mouse, because it would be so much more impactful, because you're supposed to see this mouse, and Paul sees this mouse, and he's like, ooh, dang, this means something in my prophetic visions of the future of the universe, or whatever. But the mouse just looks so fake. Like, CGI is not to the point where you can believe that these things are real, and you still can't. Like, I don't think CGI is ever going to be at that point. I'm going to be honest. Like, maybe, if you don't have a trained eye for it, maybe it looks incredible to you. But I just have CGI vision on all the time. I can tell what's real and what's not. And this is why the strongest parts of the movie are like the costumes. And like I said, the Baron's prosthetic folds, which are practical, and they look really good. And you have things like the sets. They really capture this medieval Arabic type influence, this kind of mishmash as humanity, promiscuates amongst the universe. But the main problem is just that all the scenes on Dune, they look so bad, because like it's really hard to render sand. You know what's the cheapest material ever? Sand. And you know what you can do? You can get a little bit of sand, you can just put in a sandbox and arrange it so it looks like sand dunes, and just fly a camera over that, and it'll look like a huge dune field. Sand will look like a big hill in any quantity. Sand is one of the easiest materials to get, and I get I've been to the sand dunes. I have, and they look amazing, and I'm just amazed that no Dune movie is filmed on the Great Sand Dunes, which are the largest sand dunes in North America, or like the Sahara Desert or something. There's real sand. Now the David Lynch version obviously is impeccable. Arrakis looks totally good in that, even though it's not on the Great Sand Dunes. No bones to pick there, because it's real sand. In this version, the only time it's real sand is when the characters are actually interacting with it. And, this is a problem because, the movie's called Dune, so I expect to see some actual dunes. And, I can't take this movie seriously if it doesn't make Arrakis look cool enough. I want Arrakis to look awesome, like a real place, which isn't that hard. There are some deserts on Earth where you can film, with sand dunes. You could even go to the Oregon Dunes, which is what Frank Herbert was initially inspired by to write Dune, and film there, and it would look good. I mean, the Great Sand Dunes would probably look better. They're a lot bigger, and there's less trees in them and stuff, but any dunes, just not CGI dunes, because they really look bad, and I don't feel like I'm there. I mean, on like I said, on the Atreides planet, I totally feel like I'm there, because all I gotta do is go on a cliff or something that looks moderately like Earth, like that part's not CGI, so I'm like, okay, I'm really here. But then when they're in the freaking Dune planet, I'm like, this is fake. All this sand and shit, it's all fake. The movie's called Dune. So this is obviously a big problem with the movie. The other big problem with the movie is the sandworms. I was really hoping for some good sandworms in this movie. The sandworms are the best part of Dune. They're why people like Dune. They're fucking cool. The sandworms are awesome. And in the David Lynch version, they're a practical effect, so they look freaking dope. They're just a little puppet you just pull along on a string. And it's remarkably convincing. Like, David Lynch gets it. He gets it, those sandworms look so good. And there was even an action figure made of the sandworm, and it's pure nightmare fuel, but man, that's just the coolest action figure ever right there. I really like the sandworms, because I think worms are just fascinating animals. And Dune is one of the few series that does them justice. Because, they ventilate the ground, and they, excrete nutrients, and I think it's important to, capture their stunning brilliance on film. And in the trailer, you get a glimpse of the sandworm, and I was really hoping that they're CGI, but maybe Denis Villeneuve could get them right. But unfortunately, they're only shown 3 times. 2 times it's just the mouth, and then the 3rd time the worm stands up all the way, but it's at night, so you can barely see it. And it's just some sandworms. That's what's good about Dune, is the freaking sandworms, the flippin' sandworms, that's the point of reading and watching Dune shit, is the worms. Because they're the coolest aliens in Dune. And they're what people think of when they think Dune. With practical effects, you don't have to set all the scenes with the thing at night because you're embarrassed to show it. With practical effects, you can just show your thing because it looks really fucking good. For instance, The Empire Strikes Back has those worms that are in the meteors. I personally tend to think those are asteroids. They're in asteroids. I personally kind of think that's a ripoff of Dune. They still look way better than these worms in the 2021 version of Dune. And that's because they're a practical effect. And The Empire Strikes Back is done entirely with practical effects, which is proof that you never, ever need CGI. If you can make The Empire Strikes Back with no CGI, you just don't need CGI. Now, to the original Dune's credit, it does use a little bit of early CGI. And I think this works within the context of the film because it's in the part where Patrick Stewart and that version's Paul Atreides are training, and it's supposed to look like a hologram, like a computer-generated thing. So it works, and it's also cool because it's really early CGI. But CGI should only be used when you're trying to make something look like a computer-generated image, like if it's in The Matrix or something. But when I see CGI in my Dune movie, I'm like, what the fuck? This isn't The Matrix, it's Dune. I want a grounded, realistic desert planet that feels hot and dry and thirsty. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm going after. So just on that basis, I can't say that Dune impresses. Arrakis is just not as fun in this movie as it is in the original David Lynch variety. One thing I will commend is Timothée Chalamet's performance. I don't like these youngsters, but Timothée Chalamet seems to be an up-and-comer, and I mean, for gosh sakes, he seems like he could easily develop his career into being a staple in a decade or so, and for a first role, this really isn't that bad. I think, as I said, that Dune influenced Star Wars in a lot of ways, and they're similar stories. Paul Atreides and Luke Skywalker do have a lot in common. I think Star Wars has more appeal because Luke Skywalker's story starts off simple, whereas at the beginning of Dune, Paul Atreides is already a figure of the nobility, which is harder for people to identify with, but obviously Frank Herbert put in because he's interested in explaining the politics of this world. And, that's important, I think. Dune is a much weirder movie with less commercial appeal, like with the pain box and the frickin' still suits and all this, complex shit that nobody would put in Star Wars, because Star Wars is supposed to be fun. And Dune has all this disturbing imagery and shit that really only appeals to a very specific niche. But so obviously this wasn't going to be Star Wars levels of raking in the cash. But at the same time, I do think this movie gets the dark aspect of the Dune universe correctly. It's a dark franchise. I also think the choice to have the girl from the Freeman narrate the story instead of the Empress of the Universe narrated is also interesting, because in this version we don't even see the Emperor once. He's not even a character in it, which, honestly, he doesn't do that much. He's not that important to the story. It's about Atreides versus Harkonnen at the end of the day, so you really don't need to see the Emperor up close or anything. So there is that. I think this movie is a bit heavy on exposition. Like, there's a part where the Emperor's soldiers are like, "We are the Emperor's soldiers," and it's like, yeah, we can tell that from inference, Obviously, with a universe like Dune, where everything is freaking weird and out there and bizarre, you have to explain things. But, like, I don't know, like, Paul Atreides has this, like, hologram projector that just explains everything there is to know about Arrakis and the sandworms, and it just feels like an exposition dump. Like, the hologram looks okay, and I think it's in black and white, which kind of blends the gothic type aesthetic of Dune with the futuristic aspect, which is appropriate. But I feel like these holograms are just kind of like a way for the writers to just explain what sandworms are to people who, for some reason, come to see the Dune movie without being familiar with the Dune franchise. It's like, nobody's coming to the Dune movie without having at least a passing interest in the franchise. They know what a freaking sandworm is, for gosh sakes. Feels a little forced at times, the exposition and all this, and the characters saying things that are needlessly obvious. Like, not much of the dialogue is really like that poignant or anything, which was not an issue at all with the original Dune. The dream sequences are good. The dream sequences are really tight. They really capture the kind of in and out shift that Paul's going through, as he's not sure what's in the present and what's in the future and whatever. So that's good. Obviously, original Dune has incredible dream sequences with, like, desert planet, Arrakis, desert planet, water. But this version is also, the dream sequences are pretty good. They have less CGI, obviously. There's just like this one shot of his sword on real sand, and it looks good because it's real sand and not this CGI sand that they didn't need to get, because sand is cheap and easy to find. Like, have you seen a beach? Have you seen a desert full of sand? You don't need to CGI your sand. Anyway, the dream sequences are nice. Another compliment I'll give this movie is that Paul Atreides' mom, pretty good actress. I like the dichotomy that the film drives between her being stuffy and reserved, and his being, more like, I want to stay on Arrakis because this is my destiny. Which obviously, I think this movie sequel baits at the end. I think there's probably going to be like a God Emperor Dune or Chapter House Dune somewhere down the line. Personally, I think I'd probably go see them. It's like, who doesn't want more Dune? Who doesn't want sequels of Dune, The Dune sequels never get enough credit. They're also Frank Herbert, except like the last two or whatever. And, so that's also important. I think if this franchise picks up and makes enough to get a sequel funded, I think that'd be great. I would go for it totally. Just because I'm kind of invested in this canon of Dune now, and I kind of want to see where it goes. I think the Bene Gesserit, or whatever they're called, the Order of Weird Nuns, is given a big presence in this version, which is good, because I think the idea of this secretive sect that like controls things literally over centuries. So, like, this scheme that they concoct 300 years ago is only being put in place now by their descendants is pretty interesting, and it's the kind of thing only Frank Herbert would conceive of, this, like, long-term think tank, essentially. The Bene Gesserit gets a good present. I think having Paul's mom be one of them, and, like, she kind of feels distant from Atreides. That's kind of interesting. It creates a lot of conflict, a lot of dynamic. I like that. It's snappy. Overall, I think this Dune is very visually different from David Lynch's version, and I think that's for the best, you know. I mean, there's more than one way to envision Dune. It's a book that lends itself to a lot of, different type visuals depending on how you see it. And I definitely see this version as becoming the standard version that people think of when they think of Dune. And that's perfectly okay. I think Timothée Chalamet is a really visually striking Paul Atreides. His face is very distinctive, and, you know, the way he talks is very distinctive. I just really hope the David Lynch version doesn't get overshadowed, because, I mean, it's already enough of a cult film as it is. It's as good as Star Wars. It's a great sci-fi movie. It's like a 10. It's a perfect it's a slam dunk of a sci-fi movie. Dune is incredible. The combat mechanism that they have, where, like, you can, like, if someone's stabbing you, you can, like, stave it off by sheer will for a couple seconds. That's pretty interesting. And I like how it turns red and blue, so you can kind of tell, you know, which characters are doing what. That's pretty interesting. And then in the fight at the end, where Paul fights the Freeman, they don't have those on, so it's kind of more brutal and savage, you know, because for once in his life, Paul doesn't have the advantage of this force field thing. I think that's pretty interesting. All the, like, close-up shots with the people are probably where this movie will get its, it gets the nail on the head with, like, the close-up shots of the characters. But if you're going to this movie for special effects, there's just, like, not that much. Besides the parts with the Baron, if you're easily impressed by CGI, it looks, I'm sure, spectacular. It probably looks like Dunkirk or something, but for me, I just see all this CGI shit, and I'm like, I like the David Lynch version more, because real shit, stuff that looks good and real, and Arrakis, and I like seeing Arrakis as a real planet with real dunes, and, you know, so just, like, keep that in mind. Like, the special effects are really nothing special, because everything that's not a prop or a costume or a set is CGI. And that is kind of a problem for, something that doesn't have anything about computers. Dune was written before the computer revolution. It is classic sci-fi. The technology in it runs on basically space magic. It's like Star Wars, but a lot more, mature and complex. And I think it's important to keep that in mind. Essentially, you have an ability that's just like the Force. You can compel people to do things for you. When I see the scene where Timothée Chalamet convinces the Harkonnen to ungag his mom, I'm reminded of the scene where Obi-Wan says to the stormtroopers, "Let us go by," and they do. It's essentially the same power. So it's important to keep in mind that Dune isn't a movie about computers, and therefore it should not have that much CGI. It's a grounded space opera with classic sci-fi elements. And it was written 10 years before Star Wars, so that should also be taken into account. We're talking source material older than Star Wars. We're talking a classic, and I think it warrants, like, a serious amount of respect. This isn't to say I think anyone who worked on the film doesn't have respect for Dune. I think Dune is a respectable franchise. I think it needs to be given more respect, because it's seriously, like, a formative book in the genre. And unlike a movie like Starship Troopers, where you have to change the entire tone of the movie, because the book is just not that good, and it's, like, essentially pro-imperialist propaganda, and you have to turn it into a joke, Dune isn't like that. Frank Herbert is not Robert A. Heinlein. His books aren't, like, politically stupid. Dune is a very, very well-written, tight around the edges, like, space extravaganza, and that should be kept in mind. Original Dune hits all the nails on the head. Dune is a wonderfully weird book. It's a really weird book with a lot of weird ideas in it, And David Lynch, the world's weirdest flipping director, perfectly captures those ideas on screen. And it's just, spot on. It's got Patrick Stewart. Who doesn't like frickin' Patrick Stewart? I know I do. But this new Dune is fine. It's a fine, passable, fun version of Dune. It's leagues above anything else being made these days, like that frickin' Bliss movie with Owen Wilson or whatever kind of shit schlock is coming out. You can't make a bad Dune movie, really. You really just can't. Dune's a good source material. You couldn't draw from any better. But the problem is that too much CGI. Nobody needs this much fucking CGI. You saw it with The Thing. Original Thing looks fucking awesome. That's the most awesome alien I've ever seen. Remake of The Thing uses CGI, looks like total shit. And I think the sandworms honestly deserved better. I could probably go down to the Great Sand Dunes right now with like a snake from a can of snakes from a freaking novelty shop, and I could probably just bury the snake in the sand, tie a thread to it, pull it out of the sand. It'd look better and more realistic than the sandworms in this version. But 8 out of 10, because I can't give Dune less than 8. It's a very good story. And just minus 2 points for all the CGI that this thing uses. I mean, it had the potential to be really something, but I honestly just don't think there ever will be a better version than the David Lynch one, and that's okay. The David Lynch one is freaking incredible, seriously. Go watch it if you haven't. And also just, compare and contrast. Compare and contrast the David Lynch one with this one, with the book, with the board game, with the video game, whatever. The thing about Dune is it's a franchise that has never had one standard definition like Star Trek or Star Wars. And I think that's ultimately fitting because it's not the kind of franchise that really should have like a set definition. It lends itself well to a wide variety of visions and textures, and I think that's one of the things that's made it very appealing for a lot of people. Dune is an appealing franchise, and this great movie. I had fun. I can say that. For once, I'm not going to be the cynical asshole. I'm going to say I had fun watching this Dune movie. It's entertaining. It's great. Jason Momoa is nice. Timothée Chalamet is nice. It's just the CGI. So anyway, that's my review of the new Denis Villeneuve Dune. If you liked this, then go ahead and smash those buttons and smash the potato and write to Nicholas Cicada, 1424 Columbine Street, number 1, Denver, Colorado, 80206. If you want to get your hands on some of the best comics in Denver. I think this new Dune was quite honestly, meh. Maybe not meh, maybe like a more enthusiastic meh, like meh. But not like like the David Lynch version. But watch David Lynch version, it's freaking good. Anyway, that's it for now. Sayonara, suckers.